In story number 8, we're going to talk about forgiveness. In the book, I titled this A Life of Obedience. A life of obedience is lived when we begin to know who we are and who God is. We can't really obey a God we don't know and also trust in His goodness when we don't know who we are. So obedience comes after those things. We obey because we know we're obeying a good Father. His heart is for us. And when we know His heart is for us, then we obey in 3 categories, really. The way we spend our time. How do we live? What do we do with the 24 hours in a day? With our money. What do we do with our money? Now this varies for everyone. We have all different kinds of resources. And so how are we going to spend that in obedience to God? And the last one is, how do we spend our energy? Everyone has amount of energy to expend in a day until you just kind of run out of steam, if you know what I mean. And so God is saying to us, how are you going to spend these 3 things? And the area of forgiveness falls under energy. The reason why I categorize it there, honestly, is because the number one way to zap our energy is to live in unforgiveness. And the very way to operate in obedience to God is to forgive. This may be a hard thing to understand. And in your journal and in the book, I talk about maybe ways we have misconstrued forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you forget. Forgiveness does not mean that you cover over an offense and act like it never happened and ignore it or deny it. You do tell the truth. Forgiveness does not always equal restoration. Forgiveness, simply put, means you trust God to be judge and juror over someone's life, the person that may have hurt you, abused you, or caused you harm. Forgiveness is a way to obedience because we need to be forgiven. And there's great amount of truth and healing that comes when we learn to obey God in the area of forgiveness. And I know you have a story. I have never met a person who did not need to forgive someone. And sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. It's not always the person across from us as much as it is the person in the mirror. I've counseled women and men who have committed adultery, who have done very hurtful things to their family, stolen money, who have abused their children. And they needed to forgive themselves. And I've counseled women and men who have been sexually abused, physically abused, neglected, betrayed, products of adultery, infidelity in every level. Freedom has come when they have been able to forgive. And so while this may seem like a very challenging subject and somewhat difficult to share, your freedom is at stake here. What you do with this chapter on forgiveness will mark you. And maybe you're asking, how do I know if I have forgiven or I haven't? I feel like I've forgiven this person. Okay, I want to talk to you about that. We are not perfect, but Christ is perfect in us. And when we have forgiven someone, it changes the way we think about them. So here's a test you can take. If you have forgiven someone, you will see them differently. I know this is challenging, but it is the Spirit of God in you that gives you eyes to see the person that God sees. And God sees a hurting person, desperate and needy for Him. We are all wounded in some ways, and we have all been hurt or broken in some ways. And so we hold no standard above another person. And so the litmus test we give is, are we walking in our wounded soul, or are we walking in our healed, Spirit-filled soul? And if we are walking in our Spirit-filled soul, the way that we live is this. Galatians 5. It says, the fruit that is produced by the Spirit within you is divine love in all its varied expressions. What are those expressions of love? Those expressions of love are joy that overflows, peace that subdues, patience that endures, kindness in action, a life full of virtue, faith that prevails, gentleness of heart, and strength of spirit. Never set the law above these qualities, for they are meant to be limitless. These qualities of the Spirit are limitless in you. That means they are not limited to the people who have loved you well. These qualities can be expressed to people who have hurt us, people we need to forgive. This is the beauty of believing God. It changes the way that we relate to people. It changes the way that we live. When we forgive, truly forgive, we begin to see people very differently, and we treat people very differently. So where are you at in asking the Spirit of God to heal your soul and have His Spirit move in and give you what Galatians 5 talks about, the fruit of the Spirit? So you can look at that offender differently. Believe me when I say I know this is very hard, but I believe that when you encounter the forgiveness of God for yourself and you begin to see people who have hurt you with different eyes, the Spirit's eyes, then you will walk very differently towards them too, and you will know you have forgiven them. I have a beautiful story in my life, and that is the restoration of my relationship with my father. And you can read about it in my book. But I tell you with a pure heart, the way that I used to see my father is not the way I see him today. In fact, he has read the book, and although it was hard for him to read some of it, it's beautiful. We are restored, and he is one of my sweetest friends, supportive on every level. And I would have missed out on that had I not forgiven him. So who do you need to forgive? And why do you think forgiveness is so hard, and what is in the way? And I am praying for you as you embark on this journey of learning to forgive.